another remarkable day in Olympia. I'm Renee Hopkins, and I'm the CEO of the Alliance for Gun Responsibility. Our testifiers who shared their personal and often very painful stories this morning in support of life-saving bills. You will be hearing from several of them shortly. Thank you all so much for lending your voice to this. I would like to thank our elected champions who've joined us today. First, our host, First Lady Trudy Ensley. We're so happy to have you here today. And of course, Attorney General Bob Ferguson, who's been out front and outspoken and leading on the issue of gun violence prevention. I'd like to thank Insurance Commissioner Mike Kreidler for being here and for also leading on gun violence prevention in our state. And legislative champions here. And we know champions really willing to lead on this fight. So thank you all so much for being here. We've been able to make incredible progress in the last couple of years. And last year especially, passing I-1639 when our state legislature failed to act. We know that the laws that we've passed will save lives in our state, but there's still so much more work to be done. Just an hour ago, the Senate Law and Justice Committee finished hearing bills on high-capacity magazines, ghost guns, law enforcement and victim safety, and concealed pistol license training. Bills that will close dangerous loopholes and ensure that guns do not fall into dangerous hands. The energy and turnout that we saw today is evidence that Washingtonians are not done demanding action from their elected officials on responsible, evidence-based policies to reduce gun violence. This is why we are back in Olympia with our most robust legislative agenda to date, because we know that preventing gun violence is a multi-year public safety and public health endeavor. And we know that it will not be easy. We have a great deal of work to do to turn this energy into action, but we are ready. We will be here each and every week, demanding that our elected officials act on opportunities to save lives in Washington state. Now I would like you to join me in welcoming Emily Cantrell. She's going to tell her story.
Thank you, Renee. Hello, everyone. I am Emily Cantrell. Is because the mass shooter who tried to kill me and 22,000 other concert goers had to stop and reload with 100-round magazines to shoot more than 500 people in Las Vegas on October 1st, 2017, killing 58 of them. People served best by high-capacity magazines are mass shooters. They make it easier to fire more rounds faster. That's one of the many reasons they are so commonly used in mass shootings. A recent review showed that in about half of mass shootings, shooters use these large magazines. In Las Vegas, high-capacity magazines paired with the bump stock allowed the shooter to fire 90 shots in 10 seconds. Imagine 1,100 rounds in 10 minutes coming right at you. My now husband Kyle and I dove to the ground each time a new round of rapid gunfire sprayed us, and we ran for our lives during the seconds in between. The only reason the gunfire stopped and we had brakes to run is because the shooter ran out of ammunition. I felt a bullet whiz through my hair. I thought one pierced my hand. We somehow, for a reason I will never understand, made it out that horrific night when 3 people who were standing just feet of us died. For months I slept in clothes with shoes by my bed in case I needed to run. I cried and cowered during opening day of baseball season, one of my favorite days of the year because fireworks made me relive October 1st. I cried on Thanksgiving from survivor's guilt. Whenever I enter a room, I look for an escape should I need to run. I think about October 1st every day of my life and am filled with anxiety. Sometimes I live in so much fear that I forget to live. I have seen 4 therapists, but there is no cure for what we survived. A bullet does not need to enter your body for you to become a victim of gun violence. We will never get over what happened. The only thing we can do is to learn to move forward. To me, moving forward means fighting to restrict access to prevent the next deadliest mass shooting from happening. Gun violence does not discriminate. It can and will happen at any moment unless we take action to help prevent it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Emily. I'd now like to ask Rory Graves to come and tell her story.
Thank you, Renee. My family has not only been touched by gun violence, but we have survived the nightmare of trying to ensure that my mom's shooter could no longer have access to his firearms, and the fear that her shooter would hurt our family again. On February 28th, 2012, my mother, a former Marine and school psychologist in the Tri-Cities, was beaten and shot by her then husband with a .45 caliber pistol. While my mom bled out onto the carpet, screaming for help, 911, loading and locking many of the 23 guns the police would later confiscate into his gun safe nearly a month after the shooting, as he refused to unlock it when the police called police reporting an accidental shooting. You can hear him on the 911 call climbing the stairs from the room where he secured all of his guns, save the one he shot my mom with. My mother was life-flighted to Spokane, Washington for emergency surgery, and thankfully, she fought back and miraculously survived. Her shooter was freed within hours of the shooting, and back at the house, removing computers, phones, forensic evidence, and some of the guns he had stored in the safe. In 2017, 23 firearms were restored to my mom's shooter, along with his gun rights. This was the second time since 2010 that he had his guns removed and restored following domestic violence assaults with guns. My mother's story is a devastating example of what can happen when someone intent on causing harm has access to guns. Had there been mechanisms in place to ensure that my mother's abuser, a man who had a history of domestic violence assaults with guns, had not had access to firearms that day, my family could have been spared unbelievable pain and grief. I share my story because too many families have one like it. Too many people in our state have been touched by the plague of gun violence, but there are reasonable steps we can take, like passing dangerous hands and help prevent other families from experiencing what mine did. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Rory. So I'd now like to invite David Martin, co-chair of the Regional Domestic Violence and Firearm Unit, to speak with us.
Good afternoon. My name is David Martin, and I grew up in a home with domestic violence, and I've been a DV prosecutor for over 20 years. I'm co-chair of the Regional Domestic Violence Firearms Enforcement Unit and supervise King County Prosecutor's Office Domestic Violence Unit. And I see firsthand the deadly combination of firearms and domestic violence. Almost every DV homicide in King County is with a firearm. Like the death of Tabitha Appling, executed in the presence of weapons and let out of custody on yet another domestic violence charge. Like the deaths of Jennifer Morgan and her 13-week-old baby Emma, both horribly executed by their abuser, who is now serving my last trial. Just months ago, Angelica Hayden and Megan Smith were executed by an abuser who wanted to send a message to his DV victim by killing those closest to her, sending a message of abuse. And at the King County Courthouse, there has been a vigil to remember the lives of Susanna Remerata Blackwell, her unborn child, Phoebe Dizon, and Veronica Johnson, killed by an abuser with a gun in the King County Courthouse at a family law hearing. Decades later, we still haven't answered the question every surviving family of homicide asks: why wasn't something done to prevent this? It's a wound and a tear in a family, in a community that never heals. We owe it to every family to answer that question, and we can do it with common sense legislation that is long overdue, and especially overdue when it comes to domestic violence. They are the highest risk to victims, their children. Police officer Reginald Gutierrez, killed by a domestic abuser. They're the highest risk to the public. We know domestic violence offenders are a hallmark of mass shootings. And domestic violence offenders are also an enormous risk to themselves. There is rampant suicide among DV offenders. And they are because domestic violence cases represent the lowest point in somebody's life. And the presence of a gun makes them deadly, increasing the risk of homicide by firearm by 500%. We have to take practical steps to prevent gun violence taking weapons at a domestic violence crime scene is a basic thing that needs to happen. Thank you.
Thank you so much, David, for talking with us today. Next, I'd like to invite Amy Strahan up to the podium.
Thank you. This is Amy Strahan, and I'm here today because my son Sam was shot and killed at his high school at Freeman on September 13th of 2017. He was just 15 years old. 3 of his classmates were injured, but Sam was the only one who died that day. It isn't right to call it luck, but it wasn't supposed to be that way. The shooter's AR-15, equipped with a high-capacity magazine, jammed, which meant school hadn't started yet, so the hallway was full with children, students, waiting to go to class. Imagine how different this story would be if his gun hadn't jammed. My son missed out on driver's ed. He missed his first homecoming. He missed Thanksgiving, Christmas, Valentine's, Easter. He never got his braces off. He's going to miss his prom, and he's going to miss his graduation. He's going to miss watching his sister graduate from college. He'll miss her wedding. He's going to miss watching his cousins grow up. Sam is going to miss everything. And I miss him. High-capacity magazines make it easier to shoot more people faster. If the shooter had been able to use his military-style weapon with a high-capacity magazine, there would be even more Freeman mothers like me mourning their children's lost futures. Already, I am one of far too many who have lost their children so suddenly. I truly believe it has to stop. No one law alone can prevent gun violence. Restricting access to high-capacity magazines may not have saved my son's life, hundreds of others. So I ask you to please support me in supporting these initiatives. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Amy. In the last year, we've heard a lot more from the youth voices in our communities about just how much gun violence impacts them, impacts their lives, impacts how they feel going to school, impacts how they feel in the community. And today, we have a remarkable young woman with us who is going to talk about her experience. Please join me in welcoming Nara Kim.
Hi everyone, my name is Nara Kim and I am a sophomore at Sherwood High School in Shoreline. I was born in Lakewood and I am a proud first generation Korean American, and I'm also the executive director of. Last year, the youth rose up more than ever before to demand action, and I am here today to continue that fight. Today, law enforcement have tools they can use to help trace firearms and figure out where guns came from, where they are sold, and who purchased them. But those tools only work if guns have serial numbers, the kind that licensed manufacturers are required to include and that licensed dealers can track. Right now, it is possible in Washington for an unlicensed person to build a gun from parts they printed, no serial number, and no tracking. Those weapons can't be traced by law enforcement. They make it harder for cops to solve crimes and easier for dangerous ones. I ask you to please support common sense gun reform and to make sure law enforcement can continue to do their job and to restrict access to high-capacity magazines. Gun violence is an issue that affects everyone, and the decision that representatives can make can literally change the course of not only my life, but the lives of every single individual in Washington state. You saw this past November when the youth marched to the polls to vote for candidates who promised to fight for gun reform legislation. Representatives, that if you don't fight and vote for common sense gun reform, we will vote you out. Thank you.
So much, Nora. And now I'd like to invite First Lady Trudy Inslee to the podium. But before she comes up, I just want to say a quick word about how much she has meant in our movement. She is a true leader in Washington State who cares so much about this issue, and we're so fortunate to have her here with us today. Trudy.
Thank you for all your work. And on behalf of my husband Jay and myself, I'm very honored to be here with these students and survivors who have shared their stories and remind us of why this work is so important. It's really hard that we honor Martin Luther King's birthday, who himself was a victim of gun violence. Violence prevention with bipartisan action in Olympia and smart voter-driven initiatives. Our progress has been driven by people in every part of our state. Grandmothers, parents, teens, and students have demanded change, and we are safer because of what they have done. But we're not done yet. Too many women, children, and young people in our state still suffer the devastating impacts of preventable gun violence. This year, our legislature has the opportunity to continue Washington's leading work to combat gun violence and save lives, and Nora is going to hold you to it. Washington voters have shown time and time again they want action on gun violence, so let's keep it going. Thank you, and Renee, I guess I'll turn to you for questions.
Yeah, thank you, Trudy. Great, so we're happy to take a couple of questions if anyone has any.
Renee, in the past, you've come down to Olympia to push for legislation that doesn't get through. Do you have backup initiatives ready in case these don't make it through?
Such a predictable question. I knew it was coming. Let's be clear about one thing. We've come down to Olympia year after year, and it's not that nothing gets done. We have had progress in Olympia. And what we did last November was not only pass the initiative, but we also elected for the first time a gun violence prevention majority. Washington voters spoke. They spoke that they wanted new gun laws immediately in the form of the initiative, and that they were going to elect people who knew that they had to act on gun violence prevention. So every year we come to Olympia, we make more progress and more progress, and I believe, senators and representatives, that this year is the year that our elected officials will act on even more substantive policies.
You have a lot of policies, and if some of them don't make it through, will there be an initiative in the fall?
We are focused on the
A question for the Attorney General, if he's available.
Yes.
Can you give us a status update on the pending lawsuits regarding I-1639 and your preparedness to fight these in court as anytime anything gets passed in regards to gun control, you know that that's what's coming next.
Sure. So happy to take a question on Initiative 1639, which approximately 60% of the people voted for. I'm just going to say thanks to all the folks who are here, the grassroots folks, the elected officials. I do think when it comes to the earlier question, when it comes to issues related to common sense gun reform, the people are way ahead of the politicians. And I think that initiative passing by such a large majority will help, to Renee's point, inspire legislators to pass some of these measures this session. That said, we feel confident that Initiative 1639 is constitutional and lawful. We're prepared to defend that. We've been successful in defending past initiatives adopted by the people that enacted common sense gun reform. So we don't see a different outcome coming on this one. That said, every piece of litigation is unique, but we have good folks on this, an excellent team who are prepared to just that litigation, kind of answer your question to what the update is. These are the kind of cases, anytime you talk about an initiative, you often end up before the state Supreme Court after working your way through the lower courts. So I will not be surprised if it's a lengthy process, but we're confident that the courts will ultimately uphold that.
Great. Any other questions?
Yeah, one question for you. For Alliance for Gun Responsibility, do you have a strategy of sorts for Washington State to be able to continue passing gun reform in smaller steps. We've seen more blanket efforts in other states that have failed, but you seem to be having some success here in Washington.
Yeah, I mean, our strategy is to continue pushing laws that we know Washingtonians really expect their legislators to pass. And I think we have a long way to go. We know that there are other policies, many of which are on our agenda this year, that will save lives, that we know we've seen them save lives in other states. So our strategy is just to keep working until we see a reduction in gun violence prevention, or in gun violence in our state, not in gun violence prevention. Any other questions?
What's something that current gun owners can do right now to reduce gun violence without even having with legislation? What's something that they can do today?
Safe storage. Yeah, in Washington State, that we lose more land. We're about 10% higher than the national average of suicide. That especially impacts young people, growing population of women who are taking their lives by firearm. So safe storage is paramount to keep their homes and their families safe. Okay.
Yeah. I'm Honorable Michael Puller, Suicide Jury. I'm devastated with these horrendous killings. And I'm holding these legislators here in Olympia accountable. See, this has been going on and nothing is being done. So why are you in here?
We're in here because we're
Why
going to
you
get
in
some
here?
done.
I'm talking about the legislators. You got to hold them accountable. You got to keep in mind employee. That's where they got it twisted.
I think that is a great way to end.